Hello and welcome to another episode of AWS Cloud Bytes. I'm your host Bhavesh Kumar. Today we are going to talk about another blog which is around enterprise SAML SSO implementation. And we're going to do a walkthrough from trust setup to OAuth to token generation. Let's dig in. So what is a SSO? SSO is basically a single sign-on, which means you sign into one application and then the same sign-in works into multiple applications within your enterprise. You don't have to sign in for multiple applications 20 times in a day. If you sign in one of the apps without signing in, you are able to access other apps. And usually in this case, like the example that I have, I will just set up the scenario where there are two different companies and they wanted to have a communication between these two applications. We have a SecureFinance, which is a retail banking application, and then there is a TechCorp, which acts as a identity provider. So what is an identity provider? When you log in to a Microsoft website or any other website, a Google website, you provide your username and credentials. So Google will check its own identity system to verify whether you are the right person who you are claiming to be. So that's what TechCorp is doing in this case, which is allowing its user to log into their system, and TechCorp is authenticating them against its own user base, basically the credentials that it has for its users. The users are providing their username and passwords or whatever way they're logging in. It is being authenticated by the TechCorp. So that's an identity provider. SecureFinance is a retail banking application whose services TechCorp wants to use, and it wants to give that services to its own users. So in this case, TechCorp users are going to log in to TechCorp, and from there they should be able to access all the banking solutions that SecureFinance is providing to TechCorp. That's the scenario that we're going to work through in this. Let's look into this particular setup. The TechCorp is a financial services organization, and it has its own clients and employees. So TechCorp has its own employees, which are internal users, and its external users, which are TechCorp clients. They want to access secure finance retail banking, and they want to access the information of their personal banking or business banking. You can have a relationship manager logging in from a TechOp, which is an employee. You can have a banking operation performed. This is more of internal support. The business scenario over here is that TechOp is a financial organization that needs to provide secure access to their clients and their employees. Employees are TechCorp employees, and clients are clients of TechCorp, which is employees is an internal user versus client is an external user of TechCorp to the secure finance banking application. This is a retail banking application. So secure finance applications have to be provided to clients and employees of TechCorp. The challenges are based on different user types. You have individual account holders, you have corporate account managers, you have TechOp internal employees that are serving these clients, whether they are individual or corporate. And then you have internal support personnel or the banking operations staff. So this is like internal to Secure Finance, the fourth one. Secure Finance in this case acts as a service provider, which means Secure Finance is just giving the retail banking application access, given there is a trust between TechCorp and Secure Finance. So the overall SAML SSO architecture will be that users, which means employees and customers of TechCorp, authenticates against TechCorp. TechCorp issues a SAML assertion with user attributes. This is the response that we receive for any kind of SSO request. And then TechCorp has to maintain the user directory, which means who is the right user, as well as the authentication policies at their own end. Secure Finance doesn't have any insight on that and will not do anything around that. TechCorp also signs the SAML response for trust verification. The Secure Finance, in this case, which is a service provider, is going to receive the SAML assertion Based on the trust relationship that has been established, an auth code is generated. It also hosts all the banking solution or the banking application these employees and customers or clients are going to access. So TechCorp employees access the banking solution. They can directly come to this particular URL, or they can come through a web application within the TechCorp. If the user is not logged in, they are redirected to the SSO endpoint. And then from there, a SAML authentication request is made, which goes to the TechCorp identity provider. This orange is all TechCorp. Even the user is TechCorp. It can be an employee, it can be a client. The TechCorp is going to present a login page of their own company. The user will provide their credentials to TechCorp. TechCorp will then validate the credentials against its own database. And if the user is validated, it returns a true or false over here to TechCorp. And based on success, it is going to generate a signed assertion or SAML response. When the SAML response is reached by the service provider, SecureFinance in this case, it will validate that assertion. It will then generate an auth code and then redirect the user to the banking application dashboard or whatever the landing page is. So now the user is looking at the SecureFinance banking application. Behind the scene, all these routes have happened where they have reached TechCorp. They have authenticated against the TechCorp identity database, and then they have landed back to the SecureFinance, which was the initial intent. Overall, what kind of setup is required? First step is to establish a trust relationship. Anything that you see in the bold is required. So from TechCorp to SecureFinance, they send a signing certificate. This is to validate the assertions. Then they have the IDP metadata, which is basically identity provider metadata. Includes information such as what is the entity ID, what is the SSO endpoint, name ID formats. This is like a SAML XML, which I will show you. And then the SLO endpoint, which is basically logout endpoint. Similarly, some kind of attribute contract, the roles, entitlements, identifier, which is going to be part of the assertion. So these are basically the claims. From SecureFinance to TechCorp, the service provider metadata is provided, which tells the callback URL, the ACS over here. This is where the SAML assertion is sent. When I say SAML assertion, this is sent to a callback URL. And then the SLO endpoint. Service provider signing certificates, it's not required. You have the audience and recipient URIs. Then, in order to do the trust relationship, there are some joint operational guardrails. So it's like certificate rotation cadence and notification process. Some security baselines like TLS versions to be maintained, the clock skew tolerance, assertion TTL limits, etc. So once you have this, basically this is defined in some of the information is defined over here. I won't go through this particular diagram because this is not talking about what has been exchanged. It is just showing at a high level details around things that are exchanged between the IDP and SP. We'll talk about the SSO flow over here, how the authentication happens. Let's go into the detail. So the orange color over here is the TechCorp user again. Then you have these green boxes showing the SecureFinance banking application. You have the TechCorp, which is orange over here, and then you have the TechCorp identity providers database. You can say user directory or something. What is the initial request? We have already covered this in the first sequence diagram, but we'll go again. So the user goes to the browser, looks for a banking dashboard. User session doesn't exist. User is redirected to the service provider, like this is internally. So this is the actual banking application, but this is like another department within the same company, or it can be a single box, but this is just to show that this is a central sign-in functionality. So it is sent to that particular SSO URL. From here, a SAML authentication request is generated. The user is then redirected. So the browser moves from the banking application that it was looking at to the SAML, posting the SAML authentication request, going to the TechCorp. Now over here, this is parsed and validated, which means it is looked into, the information is looked into, and then if it is a valid authentication request, a page is presented. This is the login page where the user inputs the credentials. Now, once the user inputs the credentials are submitted to the TechCorp. TechCorp validates the credentials against the database and then retrieves the user information like the roles and permissions and all other information. It then generates a SAML assertion with the user attributes. It signs it using the private key. Then the response is sent to the service provider ACS URL. This is the URL for the callback. Once the post happens to the ACS URL, the browser navigates to the ACS URL where the service provider, you can see this is the service provider. Service provider validates the signature using the public key provided by the TechCorp. It extracts the user information and maps it to an internal user profile. So it also creates the same user, but it doesn't validate the user. It is just taking whatever is coming as a SAML assertion. Once the user information is mapped, there is a one-time auth code that is generated. This can be now stored in the user context, and then the information is sent to the UI, which you can see as a browser cookie. This is a 32-bit string over here. Now from here, you can send this information to the banking solution. Now you can see this is a SecureFinance retail banking application. So you have the auth code, but you don't have a Auth2 token. What you can do is, once the auth code is available, you can use this auth code in the application ID and secret at the service provider to get an Auth token. I have not shown that part, but this is like, till this point, you have a session cookie and you are good to go and exchange a Auth token from here. So let's talk about what is auth code in this case. Auth code is like one-time use. You can just use auth code once to exchange it for a Auth2 token. To make your back and forth call between multiple APIs, you will need a bearer token. And this auth code can be used to exchange and get a bearer token. So this is again 10 minutes. It expires in 10 minutes. So if you wait for 10 minutes, it may not be useful for anyone. This is again cryptographically secure. And then this is tied to a user session. Nobody else can use this auth code for logging in except the user. Okay, let's talk about some best practices. So this is a checklist of an SSO implementation. So pre-implementation, you have to establish the certificate management procedures. You define user attribute mapping standards and agree upon what user attributes are required to be passed between the IDP and the service provider. Then you plan the session timeout and security policies. You design error handling and user experience flows, which means there will be an error page saying that the user doesn't have access, contact administrator. That administrator link can be of the IDP, because in this case, the user is managed by IDP, not the service provider or SP. At the implementation stage, you need to validate the SAML metadata exchange. We then test the signature validation thoroughly and implement proper session management. We also configure secure auth code generation in the implementation. Post implementation, we monitor SAML assertion, validation logs, so that you have tracking between the IDP and the service provider. Track the auth code usage patterns, and you can also implement security incident response procedures, which is like standard SOPs in case of security incidents. You also have a regular certificate rotation schedule between 90 days or 30 days. Usually it is 90 days. That is all about the SAML SSO implementation. We covered from a trust relationship between an identity provider, or IDP for short, and a service provider, SP for short, how a SAML request is raised when the user tries to log in, and how a response is then parsed and user is allowed to access an application. We haven't gone beyond an auth code generation, which is going to be a further detail from the point where the auth code is there, and then you exchange an auth code, which is a 32-bit string, from a 32-bit string to an OAuth 2 token that can be used for multiple calls once you're logged into the application. So your application state is managed by your client-side state management, while your backend API calls or any kind of request that you're making to the backend APIs is done using the bearer token that was generated using the auth code. Anyways, that will be covered in a separate video, but I'll just conclude at this. Please let me know if you have any questions or you have any other comments. I'll try to address it and give you more information. Thank you.